The format of our meeting today is different to our usual meetings in as much as we feel strongly, when I say we, the members of the committee of the province of Greater London of the SRIA, we all feel in a very similar way that the study of the mysteries is not something which is just something which can be focused on purely through the intellect. And so consequently, we have revised this or reinstated this over recent years, that from time to time our study group meetings have an emphasis on the arts and the senses and the sensory experience, more of an experiential study of the hidden mysteries of nature and science and the subjects that we share an interest in. And so today's meeting is based upon an exploration through music, sound, sometimes through movement, through dramatization, so that we can apprehend the study of the mysteries not just from the realms of the intellect, maybe as has been previously the case over many years in these meetings. Somebody would write a paper, they would present the paper, and then there'd be intellectual discussion following that paper. But really, this approach of the Rosicrucian Salon of the Arts is to explore feeling. So, without going on any further, I'd like to make only one excuse for today. We're not a production company. We're doing this out of a labour of love. So, if there are any rough edges here and there, be patient with us. We're not a slick production company, but we're doing this because we want to enthuse about subject matter that we're all interested in. We're broadcasting today from the Atlantis Bookstore in Museum Street in central London, just across the road from the British Museum. And we very much look forward to the various presenters who are going to be contributing to our meeting today. So I would say treat this as gently and patiently as you possibly can, and we hope that you get something of real value from our meeting today. Thank you very much, everybody, and we're going to start with a piece of original music composed by Frater Robert Gordon. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce two of our friends this afternoon rather, who are Frater Alistair Lees and Geraldine Beskin, whose wonderful institution of an occult bookstore we have the privilege of broadcasting from today. So I'd like to hand over to Alistair and Geraldine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheen, and thank you, Rob, for that marvellous musical interlude. Reminds me of an interesting quote from Rick Wakeman, who said that he'd probably have to get up and give the music at his own funeral, as he wasn't probably happy with what he heard. But we're here today to talk to Geraldine and ask her a few questions, Geraldine, yes, about your fabulous bookstore, somewhere we've all been to, but perhaps don't know very much about.
Right.
So, what does the history of the 999-year history of this place mean to you?
It's only 99 so far. 99 and 3/4. So we're. It means the world to my daughter Barley Beskin and I, basically. We thrive on it. We like being enablers for people to find an inner spiritual life, however they like to work it. And that gives us great pleasure. We see people come in and they develop. And being a part of that is an absolute honour with people. And as a family business, it means a tremendous amount as well. I've been here with Barley for nearly 20 years now. I was here with my mother for I don't know how many years. And she then took it over because my dad had died. And so it has run through our family since the late 1950s, and it's a strange little shop, but we pack a mighty punch, as I say, really. But we have an awful lot of stock. We don't have multiple copies of things on shelves. We have individual books, and so the sections come and go. They expand, they contract. But we do new books and second hand, so that's always very, very interesting. And overall, it means a lot to us, and we're pleased that it means a lot to other people as well.
Which makes me think, what's the most popular thing that people come into your bookshop for? Just a one-liner?
Currently it's tarot. But what is also good is many more men are reading the tarot now. So the symbols...
Really? Who are these people?
They're working on their subconscious, and it's fantastic. Wonderful.
So how do you feel about us Rosicrucian Freemasons coming here as part of the Metropolitan Study Group and using this for our study group meetings?
We're absolutely delighted because you're a kind of offshoot of Masonry. We've always been considered the wrong side of the blanket, as it were, in terms of mystical work, because we're magical. Watkins started off coming out and backed by the Theosophical Society, and they were always mystical, and quite rightly so. We were always magical, and that's always been rather more frowned upon. Now we are very much, thanks to Harry Potter and our customer J.K. Rowling, we are very much, she went public, so now we can, very much in the mainstream. And we like that. We like the energy that it brings and how it's acceptable to be interested now. But the Western mysteries are so important to us. And I'm not a Little Englander, I'm more of a mad Celt, really, but I like the fact that the stuff to do with the British Isles is making sense to an awful lot of people now. And the folklore sections, just how we used to do it, a lot of that is hokum, really. I don't practice the way my grandmother did. I don't even practice the way my mother did. It evolved. Barley doesn't practice the way I do. It evolves, all of this. And like the music, when 150 years ago, when the SRIA started, they may well have started with a patriotic song or something to settle people down and to get them opened up to what might be about to happen. And to have such a modern piece made specially or created specially for you is very, very, very thrilling. And I like the fact that now you don't have to just be there on the night. You can catch up with things when it suits you as well. And it's a wonderful time to be involved with all of this. And as I say, we are deeply, deeply honoured and very pleased to have you here.
Well, I have to say, Harry Potter, it's really interesting to read some of the old papers that came out when the first Harry Potter books came out, and how the Rosicrucians at the time were absolutely enthralled that, the children are asking after what Daddy does at the weekend.
Yeah. But one of the best things about those books were that they made the world literate again.
Yes, to help
they didn't
young
have
children
pictures, and the parents and the grandparents read them as well as the children, and the whole world became literate again. And then it was about magic.
You weren't a proper dad unless you'd read Harry Potter.
Exactly.
Children.
Exactly.
So, what does televising this, or video conferencing, or communicating out of Atlantis bookshops mean to you? How important is this medium?
I think it's great. We've always been very poor at communicating with the world. We kind of know that people will find us. We've rather relied on that to some extent. We're about not to. Next year we're going to be 100, and we're going to be so
slick.
Modern. I won't be allowed to touch anything ever, except possibly put the kettle on.
Would you like me to get that in mind?
No, it's well known. I think it's absolutely excellent. It's the world is a clever place now, and we can shape it to suit us. It's good.
Humour is important, but now, where are you in your spiritual journey?
I'm becoming more abstract about things in a way. During lockdown, I spent the first few months sitting on the couch saying we're doomed. And then I sort of lay on the couch and watched telly till about 4 a.m, and I was really no use at all. And then Barley said, I never swore at my mother, but Barley swore at me that particular day, and basically said, get a grip. There's a business that I'm running on my own here. I need you back. And so my reading was familiar things, and I found Yeats and Blake and all those standards in our worlds very, very good for me, because they fed me on an emotional, spiritual level, and they weren't demanding that I stood on my hind legs and did formalised rituals or anything like that, but they nourished me, as they always have.
You ever stop reading as the owner of a bookshop? One of the impressions I had.
Yeah, I like a nice murder on the bus.
Night off, murder on the bus. Okay, that sounds absolutely right. Which leads me nicely to, apparently, you found something new and exciting in the British Museum about William Westcott. Would you like to share that with us?
Oh yes. It was what he happened to, or did or didn't happen to him in the museum. That I was reading Yeats, and he said that he used to work with a man who had no ability as a seer at all, but he could press the right buttons, as it were, magically, for things to manifest. He had happened to have a very beautiful wife who was a terribly good seeress, and so the timing is that it was Mathers, and Mina Mathers he was talking about. And they used to meet outside London, and they, which was basically Forest Hill, which is a suburb of London now, but they met in the, he worked for the collector of objects from around the world, who had opened his collection to the world, and he was by the gardens and all the rest of it. So that's obviously the Horniman Museum.
Horniman Museum. I was trying to help you there.
Yes. Well, Mathers lived in Stent Lodge there, but I actually think from my own research is that he lived in the stable above the stables there, which would have made much, much, much more sense, because he didn't have a particularly good job at the museum, which was just being set up at the time. And so because there was accommodation above the stables, I think that's where they were. But Mathers, had a chart with lots of numbers and bright coloured things on and a wooden mace, and he activated the right numbers, and this seeress was able to conjure things which Yeats could then see for himself, and the three of them would then share a vision. And on one classic occasion, they broke off, had dinner, and went back in, and the seer was still there waiting for it. The vision was still there waiting for them.
Do you mean they didn't? Seers don't drink online then?
I don't know. But So, but then some years later, he was in Paris and he'd come home late the night before, so nobody in the household had seen him. He was staying with friends. He had then gone out before breakfast to get a newspaper. And as he said, he was just telling himself one of those stories that, oh, blimey, if such and such had happened, then I would have broken my arm, or, all these, if I hadn't missed that coach and horses kind of idea, or it hadn't missed me, I could have broken my arm. So he went in, and the maid was laying the table for breakfast. She saw him and told the mistress of the house she'd seen Yeats with his arm bandaged, which was at the time he was thinking about that. And then when he went down to breakfast properly, and the hostess said, "What's happened to your arm? Is it better? Did you get run over last night?" And these were all the thoughts that he'd had. So then a little while later, he was still in France, and he had a message he wanted to send to a friend who was hundreds of miles away. And he couldn't work out how to put it in a letter, and didn't particularly want to put it in a letter. So he appeared in a crowded hotel lobby to his friend. Nobody else could see him. He couldn't speak to his friend, but the friend managed to communicate, "Come and see me later when it's quiet." So that night, he appeared to his friend, told him the message, and when they caught up, Yeats was able to say, "I had no idea I'd done that he'd been able to separate himself." So, in March 1888, Mina Mathers is initiated into the Golden Dawn, and they really didn't know what was going to happen, doing this live actual magic and with a woman as well. They didn't know if she would turn into, a green mass. They didn't know if she would disappear. They really had no idea what she had agreed to do. Anyway, the Golden Dawn is set up. A month later, Westcott says, "I'll meet the Reverend Lemon and Mr. A.B., whoever that may be, in the reading room of the British Museum." If you haven't ever seen the reading room, it's one of the losses to London that they have blocked it all off now. Just Google it. It is simply spectacular. And they could still have their bloody exhibitions and light the ceiling, they light the dome, it would be good. Anyway, so he's meant to go there. He overnight develops a nasty chesty cough, so he can't get there for the next day, which is Friday the 13th of April, 1888. So he can't make it, can't tell his friends. So meanwhile, one of them turns up and says to a man who's in charge of the umbrellas, "Have you seen Westcott?" And he said, "Yes, he's over in his usual seat." And this person didn't, because he'd seen him wandering about and then go to sit in his normal seat. Then he couldn't find him. So he asked another friend of theirs, a woman this time, who, if she'd seen him. And she said, "Yeah, he should be over there. There's his seat." And she saw him. But Westcott was in bed, with, a hot poultice on his chest kind of idea. He really was not there. And that became quite a famous thing. And it obviously niggled them to some extent, because 10 years later, her name was Ellen. I can't remember her surname. Anyway, she wrote a testimonial saying exactly what she had seen that day. It was a story that didn't lie down amongst them, really. So that was good. And then the only other time I've been involved with anybody who could bilocate was with your ex-Supreme Magus, Andrew Stevenson.
Right.
I loved Andrew. I just thought he was darling, and very encouraging. And one of the orders that he was involved with, they discussed for 17 years whether to let women in or not. And eventually Bob Gilbert took along Marjorie Debenham, the supremely marvellous Marjorie Debenham, and she said, "Well, of course I was a member. Don't be silly." And so myself and another lady then joined. She dropped out, so I stayed with it. But so I loved Andrew. Anyway, worst housekeeper in the universe. You couldn't find his vacuum cleaner for dust. It was incredible.
I never went to his house.
Oh,
The greatest sorrow I have. I hear so much about it.
The proper organised chaos. Brilliant. Anyway, we used to go to discreet meetings in the afternoon at a house in North London. And one day, it didn't have a name, it wasn't a society or anything like that. We just used to get together and see what happened. And Andrew turned up one day, late, which was unusual for him, and quiet. And he was a quiet man anyway, but he was just quiet throughout the thing. And then he left early. The next time we met, we said, well, what happened to you last time? And he said, that you were very quiet. And he said, well, I wasn't there. And we said, yeah, but you were. And he said, but I wasn't. And he'd been at a Masonic meeting. And the minutes showed he had been at that Masonic meeting. And then he leant in and he said, thing is, Geraldine, whenever you're in two places, you're never very effective in the second place.
I thought you were going to tell the story about him seeing somebody on the street coming out of a door, which obviously meant that this man was having an affair with somebody and he was a very close friend and associate, and he'd kept that very much to himself. But that wasn't being in two places at one place, that was being in the wrong place.
Yes.
Now, do we have any more questions for Geraldine from the floor? If not, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for having us here. I know I'm going to enjoy coming to study group meetings here, and I'm sure everybody who's here and knows you will. And I'm sorry we're going to have to let you be involved.
It'll be an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Lee Gerard Barlow and I'm here to introduce a meditation piece which we shall go into in a moment. Previously, I was previous Director of Studies for the Metropolitan College of the SRIA, and during my particular tenure I brought forward the proposition that a series of the Salon Rose Choir should be transmitted to whoever was willing within the society to experience this new form of experiencing the exposure to knowledge that we have as a society, to take that different approach, the non-intellectual approach. I'll explain a little bit about that first of all. As we see within the symbolism of many societies, even if we look at the churches, Christian churches themselves, you have the lion, bull, the eagle, and the man. These are often synonymous with the ideas of the elements themselves. And so within the tarot and the tarot system, we of course have the corresponding elements of air, fire, water, and earth, and the corresponding ritual tools, the sword, the wand, for example, the pentacle, for example, and so on. So when these things, when we take them as being actual tools, what do they symbolize? So, for example, the pentacle symbolizes the body, powers of the body itself. The sword being the intellect. So we were saying earlier, Frater Sheen was mentioning, to not only work with the intellect, but rather work with the cup, the feelings, the heart, the physical body, the energy of the body, for example, the wand. So if we take these things, use them as points of focus and awareness, we can then meditate in some really very interesting ways. So I'd like you all to begin now, while I'm speaking, to pay attention to the physical body itself. Just begin to notice your feet upon the floor. If you're sitting down, just begin to notice the sensation of your legs, your bottom touching the chair. Begin to notice the sensation of the clothes touching your skin. Begin to notice the sensation of the air upon your skin, upon your face, upon the back of your hands. Now we're beginning to notice the powers of the body. If we pay closer attention, we can begin to notice the feeling of the blood moving through the corpuscles of the body. So just spend a few moments doing this. And also become aware of the light, the quality of light upon what you can see. If you're sitting in your room now, just take a look around you and begin to notice the quality of the light in the room. Let the images you see come to your awareness without placing any particular meaning to what you see. Just open and allow those images to arrive to your conscious awareness. Focus upon the visual field as if nothing else existed, only that which you can receive with your eyes, placing no significance upon anything you see. As we gradually do these exercises, we'll begin to open the sensory realm in a different way to how we normally experience what we perceive. And now move to what you can hear. Allow the sounds to arrive to your conscious awareness. Whatever sounds may be appearing, allow them to arrive to your conscious awareness. Just spend a moment or two doing this. If we expand these practices in private, we can extend the periods of time that we place upon the visual field, upon the auditory field, upon the physical. Slowly become aware of the feeling of energy, blood, the magnetic qualities of the blood as it courses around the body in different permutations. Down the arms, into the fingertips, up the top of the back of the head, and around the body. Some of you may begin to notice that you can, at will, cause this to flow around the body to wherever you wish. After a little while, you can then begin to bring the breath into this, and with the breath and your focused awareness, begin to flood the body with awareness. Okay, I've just given you a little brief sketch, a little brief outline of how we can practice in this way. And the more we practice in this way, and the longer periods we practice in this way, the more our appreciation of the senses begins to open up, like a rose opening its flowers to the light. I've brought us to this particular point because I'd like to now bring our attention onto a piece of art. This is very much in accordance with the aims of the Salon Rose Croix, which in the future we will be doing as open public events. The Salon Rose Croix will feature dance, theatre, art, music, people from not necessarily connected directly with the order, but people from the public realm who we feel carry the spirit of that Rosicrucian spirit. And for the first time, we will have a pure and flowing exchange between the inner and the outer. What we believe this will do is bring the necessary healing to the world that we wish to see taking place in the years to come. On this note, let us now focus upon this piece of art. We don't necessarily have to focus directly upon the piece itself, but we may also begin to notice the other things surrounding the piece. Just focus your awareness upon the body. Keep your awareness upon the body. Feel the subtle vibrations of the energy within the body and around the body. And as you're doing this, just continue to look at the portrait. In this particular instance, we have a portrait of Samuel Biddle McGregor's Mathers. And this has been chosen because it's one of the most unique pieces that the Atlantis Bookshop actually has in its possession. It forms a link to one of our previous members, and a very interesting link that is. By opening ourselves up to the senses, we can begin to receive information in new and unexpected ways. We can begin to form a link in new and unexpected ways. Maybe there is some kind of a special message for you, which may not come in the form of a thought, but may come in the form of a feeling. It may come to you in the form of a dream. Maybe some kind of daydream. Maybe a dream later tonight. Or maybe nothing at all. But by beginning to learn how to open ourselves in this way, we can begin to receive more than we previously believed was possible. I'd just like to ask you to begin now to choose a point of focus upon the portrait, and then gradually open the scope of your vision so that it becomes wider and wider. At the same time, while you're focusing upon one particular point of awareness, of focus, also simultaneously become aware of your peripheral vision. What is happening at the edges of your vision, as well as that which you are experiencing in the center of your vision. and appreciate the whole of what you see. Pay attention to the body, to the sensations of your physical body, which is your temporary connection to this world. Because it will give you information that you normally pay little attention to. Feelings which are created within you are vital and important. We can carry this faculty that we are developing now into all situations in our everyday lives. Learning to become more and more intuitive, paying more and more attention to what needs attention within our physical body, which is the foundation of our being. Perhaps sometimes we are more stressed than we would like to be. Maybe we ignore our feelings when we should be paying attention. Just let what comes come. And treat whatever comes as a gift. Because that is precisely what it is. And now I'll fall into silence for you to personally discover what you need to discover from this experience. Thank you all. You can now begin to just bringing your attention back to the body. Take a good look around you in your room. And I'd like to thank you all for partaking in this meditation. This forms the basis of how we can approach other pieces of art in the future.
Lee.
Oh, Stephen. Really, really good to see you. Such a long time.
Well, yes, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. I had a terrifying experience on the underground. It really is one of the most grim experiences, and yet in Norfolk, it's equally ghastly. I simply can't exist in either world. And 2 years ago when we last met, it was absolutely so different. I explained to you that by going to Norfolk, what I was intending to do was to complete the work that I'd started on the art, alchemy and attainment of Fulcanelli. And it went off so well. During lockdown, I was able, over a glass of absinthe, to discuss with Fulcanelli his way of thinking, the comparison of architecture as a language, the insight into our alchemical work, with such wit, wisdom, savoir-faire and panache. And I was then able to use my early drafts, as you know, to publish in the pamphlets that the province published. the insights I had on the cyclic cross-on die that corresponded to the
I remember it well.
eclipse. And then in June of this year, the magnificent sort of sundial at Holyrood House, which actually showed that the alchemist, in attaining the stone, became the one form with the stone. The energy of the alchemist, the form of the alchemist, and the stone he created was actually the mystery of the one thing. It all went so well. And at this high point, darkness started to enter. Things began to change. I found Fulcanelli's wisdom a bit trite. I ceased to laugh at his jokes. And actually, I looked at the photographs I'd taken of Notre Dame, the monastery of the Black Madonna in Marseille, and the cloister in Arles, and rather in one language, they were actually a series of clashing dialects. It's quite extraordinary. Darkness, again. I try to walk this off through the countryside, and then have the most mysterious experience of being observed by birds. Observed. Black birds. And had I been mistaken, I would have thought it would have been a raven, but no raven exists in Norfolk. But the most extraordinary thing was that if you look on the front piece of the Mysteries of the Cathedral, there is depicted by Jean-Julien Champagne a great bird on a death's head. Shocking. And the wings of that bird started to darken the sun. Darkness was everywhere, and its ghastly beak penetrated my heart. So I thought, let's put this aside, go on to the other piece of work I was trying to do. On Nicolas Poussin, and I have to say, you've got to go to the exhibition at the National Gallery. Magnificent. But the work of his that most fascinates me is Et in Arcadia Ego. The portrait, 4 shepherds gesture at a tomb and a mysterious figure. I actually understand that, as others do, to be concerning the myth of Daphnis. Daphnis, a beautiful nymph who enchanted Pan, and Pan taught him the pipes. And Daphnis walked through Arcadia, enchanting the world of Arcadia, the people, the animals, with his playing, his artistry, his wisdom and his charm. Everybody except the gods, who actually envied the praise that Daphnis received, the adulation of the crowds, and did what gods do, engineered his death. And so the portrait of Daphnis in that picture, what the shepherds are doing, are gesturing to say, is this what we, who find wisdom, beauty, and meaning in the universe, will encounter? Death. The figure they gesture to, reason has nothing to say, for she cannot answer those points. For et in Arcadia ego, in Arcadia here am I. Death comes to Arcadia. Death comes to paradise. As you realise, the very opposite of what I hope to achieve by studying this painting. And so I went to Netflix, because after all that deadens the mind. And strangely, the film that I actually encountered, mysteriously, was The Maltese Falcon, the great black bird, where the incomparable Caspar Gutman, Joel Cairo and Miss O'Shaughnessy pursue the black bird that is their death. And there's a particular scene in that film that's always worth freezing over, where Sam Spade, the ace of spades, has hit Joel Cairo and then empties his pocket, and falling from the gardenia-scented handkerchief of Joel Cairo are 3 coins. The coins that, well, I use anyway, I'm not sure that you do as well. I used to encounter the I Ching, an act of divination. Quite why Houston incorporated the scene as beyond me in the film. But it offered a red thread, a way out of the labyrinth of darkness and despair and death. And so I pursued that, hoping to encounter our master, Christian Rosenkreuz. But of course that was never to be. The person at the gate of the labyrinth was in fact none other than the Prince Prospero. You remember Prospero, who chose, when pestilence swept the lands of which he was prince, locked himself away in his castle with his retinue and court, to seal himself from this awful prospect of death by the plague. And every night Prospero held a mask, And on this particular occasion, it was a mask of life. And as the maskers rejoiced and the revels increased, and the music was at its height, Prospero saw across the room a mysterious figure, dressed as the king in yellow. And Prospero, for whom all life was a jest, found that this was a jest too far, and said, "Who comes to my revelry and insults me with such blasphemous mockery?" Walking across to the figure, he tore the pallid mask from the yellow mummer and found the headdress untenanted by any tangible form. For death himself had come to Prospero in his chamber, and Prospero shrank, retreated through the 7 rooms of his private chambers, each room decorated in the colour of the peacock's tail, till he reached the westernmost chamber, the one covered in sable draperies of the darkest black, and there before the ebony clock that chimed 12, he fell in death. And I find myself with Prospero in death, putrefied, decomposed, as Valdemar, released for the mesmerist's trance. And all I can see in this desperate state, above that door, is the pallid bust of Pallas, upon which a raven is perched. A pallid bust of Pallas. The raven on Pallas. Wisdom killed by death. The gods killed by death. The prospect for all of us, death. You can understand, Lee. I'm in despair. I only see you through the veil of darkness. You need death. Despair.
Ah, 2 parched Rosicrucians in need of a beaker. Some wine?
Please, are you going to taste the wine?
Absolutely. I was imagining that it was rather putrid.
Well, let's try it. Frankly, anything that awakens my jaded palate from its deathly tastes would be welcome. It's a New Zealand wine, I see. I'm not sure that'll do. Cheers.
Cheers.
So,
Very good to have seen you.
I rely on you to raise my spirits from this
Well,
ghastly...
I assume I'm seeing you. Yes.
Well, yes. I mean,
Am I really seeing you? I mean, it seems like a dream. I've not seen you for so long.
well, I think I think, we've just talked of bilocation. Being in 2 places, we physically are, but your mood is. I cannot rise myself from this torpor, this weighing down, this heaviness of death, waiting for something to happen, some infusion of spirit.
Well, come on. I mean, something can happen.
Well,
Chat.
Oh, by the way, I'm not sure about the cheese. It's interesting that cheese, of course, in death, we are consumed by fungus. But in life, actually, cheese, rotted by fungus, is the most glorious delicacy.
Oh, yes.
Nothing better comes from Stilton, I can assure you.
Oh, yes. I agree. So, yeah, I mean, actually, I must admit, things haven't been easy, but there is a bit of light on the horizon.
Light.
Yeah.
That is what we seek. Light and colour, which it is said is the next step. But, of course, as you've said before, it comes by grace. We can await it, but we have to earn it. And God gives us that next step. But how did you make that next step yourself? You were saying that your work had taken you to a better place than you'd hoped.
Yes. Well, I was working on a particular formula. I'd been working on it for quite some time over in France. I've been spending quite a lot of time over there. And during the last couple of years, I was pretty isolated, really, out in the French mountains. And I was working on some rather foul-smelling stuff. But actually, after a little while of working on it, it started to smell much sweeter, much lighter. and the mood changed quite a lot. Externally, quite a lot of things started to happen. I noticed that a great feeling of hope started to appear. For example, Joanna, I remember she's got boys on the way.
Oh my God.
Apparently, like twins.
Yes.
And she's doing really, really well. And Philip, he got married as well. Like, I've not seen him for a long time. He's got married. Everything seems to be changing for a lot of people. There's a lot of good things happening.
Well, actually, it seems that a lot of birth and growth is happening in France, not a lot in Norfolk. But actually, colour, how is it we move from darkness and blackness to those unfolding colours of the second stage?
Well, I mean, we begin to understand that which weighs us down is not actually necessary. It's a necessary part of the stage, but it's a necessary part of our own phase. But the more we focus on the awareness of where we are, the more those feelings begin to change.
I mean, I found despair very difficult to overcome. And yet,
I
surprisingly, do you know, actually, I hope it's you rather than the wine, but the combination of both, I have to say I'm starting to feel better already. It's as if somebody's, well, there are 6 candles behind you and one in front of you, but actually I've just seen that they're lit. The light's starting, the glitter
It's
is
starting
starting
to feel a little better. That's good. That's very good, because this is what needs to happen.
Well, it does, and of course, actually, we talk about the act of the alchemist on matter, but that's what we act upon when we meet each other.
Yes, absolutely, and of course, anything that I say is going to affect the way you're feeling.
Yes, so
And,
and indeed, what do you think in terms of the relationship between the matter and the operator? Do you feel when you're working, are you being drawn into matter, or is your mind focusing on that work?
Well, it's essentially a continuum. I think it's a continuum. It's something which, as I say, as you're working on a particular substance, you can then begin to start to notice the things that happen in yourself, but also in the external world. You begin to realise that there's no separation between the physical and what goes on in the mind.
Well, that's of course an extraordinary thing. What goes on in the mind?
Well,
Because we think the mind is inside,
yeah,
but the mind is all we see. So matter we manipulate is actually the changing of the structure of our mind and our brain.
look, when you're asleep and you have a lovely dream where you're sitting on a beach and the sun is actually reaching your skin and you're feeling all of the heat on your skin and you're looking at the sun and feeling like you're having a wonderful time sitting on a beach. Where is that?
Well, that's an interesting point, because in Alice Through the Looking Glass, when Alice meets the Tweedle brothers, they discover the Red King. And Alice, being, well, she's 7.5, she knows no better, and she strides over to talk to the sleeping king and to wake him up. And aghast, the Tweedle brothers stop her because they say, if he wakes, we'll be snuffed out like a candle. We're only here because we're in his dream. And of course, that's a modern concept. But of course, the Tweedle brothers and Alice and the Sleeping Red King only exist because they're in our mind as actually we read it. So that ephemeral anxiety about existential, their existence is of course our existential anxiety experienced through that text.
Well, the classic question, really, where am I?
Well, it's, as you say, it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't ever say that the importance of being earnest is an esoteric tone, but there's a moment when Lady Augusta Bracknell looks at Ernest, John Worthing, and says to him, I hope you don't think this is impertinent, John, but who am I? And of course, being Edward in England, they gloss over that apparent existential statement. But isn't it whatever character in a drama says, who am I? Do I exist? And of course, in a drama, there is no existence of a character other than the mind of the observer, which raises the issue of the existence of the changing matter of our alchemical operation. Of course, this is why it's both material and spiritual. Our spiritual actions change the matter of our mind. This is why, and I know we've mentioned Andrew Stevenson before, and one of the discussions I had with him is over the difference between spiritual and physical alchemy, because there was a time talking about spiritual alchemy was, all alchemy was spiritual, physical alchemy was derided, and yet now we know the brain is material, and actually we can affect as minds our own matter and change it, and in doing so change the matter of the universe. It's one of those strange things of the sort of quantum mechanics, which tells us that actually our observation of matter changes it. The future of the universe is physically affected by looking at it. Now, looking at you, of course, I'm not entirely sure how it could affect your universe, but somehow our encounter is affecting not just a metaphor of the universe, but the universe itself. So I better be careful of your language, of course.
I would be in agreement. Would you like some salt on your biscuits?
Yes, but not too much. I good heavens, I've got blood pressure problems now.
Goodness me.
If only you could find the philosopher's stone, that would help with my longevity. However, this is the crux of what you were saying earlier. How does art help us? Well, we talk. It's a cliche that alchemy is a science and an art, much as the guilds talked of being sciences and art. But science is to know, and that is knowing in its Gnostic sense. We know what is. Art is to make a form, to transfer the genius of the alchemist, the genesis of creation, into a physical form. So science and art is form and spirit come together. Now, obviously, in a lot of modern art, you would wonder whether that's absolutely true. Though I'm told that, actually, of course, we look at that, and is modern art trying to tell us that the future is a despairing, unfolding, abstract mass? Are they looking at the future or forming it? But whatever it is the future. We have to embrace it, because in the future is where the direction that our magical gesture is taking us. It's often said that, if words create the universe, you must be very careful what you say. An ill-considered statement may let the dark forces in, which, as Lady Bracknell would say is an act of supreme carelessness.
Yes.
And, of course, there is that second stage that goes from white to red. Often it's said, you look at the French flag, Louis David, with red, white and blue, which is... Oh my goodness me.
Is it time we moved on to some red?
What a coincidence. Wow. Amazing. What?
Yeah.
As you're saying.
Well, service in this establishment is extremely good, I have to say.
Australia's finest.
This may have been
so is that tautology, or is that...
This may be an example of what you were just speaking of, yes?
Yes, because actually, unexpectedly, the red enters. And, but anyway, good heavens,
Cheers.
the blackness has given way to whiteness, and I'm actually getting more enthusiastic. But rubido, redness, it's a strange, it's a strange colour, isn't it? Red.
It's a beautiful colour.
It's extraordinary, for all that we talk about alchemy, that blood, the redness of blood, is the iron chelated in hemoglobin. So red in blood is iron. Yet iron in esoteric correspondence is not red at all. It's gold that is red. and here we have the fruit of the vine. That this fruit, this grape, is emerged because chlorophyll in a plant, the greenness, has actually created matter out of light.
It's almost as if each one of these is a little vessel.
Yeah. It is indeed. It's
A little cooking vessel.
it's a sealed container, and often, and this is where sort of the aspect of our work that talks about the secret fire has often been interpreted as alcohol. So alcohol in wine juice creates a drink that's been enjoyed, and actually, I have to say, alcohol has entirely beneficial effects on transmuting my mood. So, ethanol, and so it again tells us that there are lots of everyday things that we dismiss,
Indeed.
we overlook,
Yes.
because we're actually looking for sort of, well, I hesitate to say, because we are of course looking for lead transmuted into gold, and the alchemist achieving immortality. But beneath that are all sorts of processes in the natural world that prefigure it. Fermentation of wine, the creation of bread, and so the correspondence. Well, we say correspondence, but it's the one thing. We engage with,
Like I say, a continuum.
I continue. Yeah, we engage with the green world, and I think, as I said, that the interesting thing about the emerald tablet is it's not the words of an historic figure, Hermes Trismegistus. It is nature speaking of itself. It is nature telling us how to encounter itself.
There's no separation anyway.
There's no separation, and of course nature actually, because nature creates wine, it's the universal medicine that changes all things.
Well, I think if anything, it kind of makes us a little bit more aware of the fact that there is no separation. We just enter into the experience.
Well, yes, because actually it's, I hesitate to use the word in such a sedate situation as a Rosicrucian Salon, but ecstasy has always been part
Of course.
It's both using, as of course the Paladin Co. used laudanum and opium derivatives and alcohol to support their visions, which of course now has a sort of adverse moral effect. But the manipulation of the senses was key to actually dissolving this illusion that we and the universe are separate.
As they say, loosening the girders of the soul, as they say.
Yes, intoxication has often been described in that way.
Yes.
But that's a very dangerous thing, because we sort of think, well, there's you, Lee, there's me, Stephen, and we're two separate people.
Well, surely is that not the meaning of love?
Well,
To actually realise the oneness between us?
yes.
And between all things?
Well, yes, because actually love is an abstract quality that takes us towards who guides us in all things. For it is said, quite rightly, that God is love. And that's, we often use the word passion these days, overused. Who can have a passion about sausage production? But passion, of course, is applied to the journey of Christ following Good Friday. But actually, I think one of the things I've always thought about you and I, Lee, is we are deeply led by our passion to achieve what is the completion of all things. Because I've never had any doubt, whilst of course Fulcanelli slightly disappointed me recently, that actually he shares our passion to actually make sense of the universe by completing it in its final act, the gesture of the stone. I mean, not to dwell too left field, but it's the final scene in Jules Verne's journey to the centre of the earth. Which
You
of
were
course-
always a big fan of Jules.
Absolutely. And the book is inspired by the journey of an Icelandic alchemist, Arni Saknussemm, who signposts the journey from the outward to the centre. And you read, interestingly, Jules Verne was writing at the same time as Lewis Carroll. But what he does is take, in the centre of the earth, the seekers find a spot where the last mark of Arni Saknussemm in the centre, and a Spanish dagger, and actually what's that? It means that Arni Saknussemm has brought from Spain an object of iron, and at the centre of the earth he's achieved transmutation, which, when it's achieved, the alchemist disappears from the visible universe. So he's dropped the dagger that lies there, and it's left to Professor Lidenbrock and his followers to find it. At the centre, at the moment of the alchemist's achievement, we disappear. Now, obviously, given that you and I are having a conversation, we haven't quite reached that exalted
Well, I
moment.
still see you as something outside of myself, so surely you're there, aren't you?
Well, you see that. I mean, what would Lady Bracknell say? That probably you're showing signs of triviality in that conversation, because absolutely, she would be appalled at the thought of being too close in proximity. But this is the point. Because it's the difference between we are two people, and yet what we see of each other is you are what I perceive you, but essentially what I perceive and understand of you is in my mind and in here.
But surely, if we were to realise ourselves as one, then surely we wouldn't exist at all. Because surely there is no such thing as one.
I mean, one person, one beard, possibly.
One person, one beard. But like literally no such thing as one. Because in order for the one to understand itself as one, it needs to compare itself to something, doesn't it?
See, I think you're quite right. Actually, the experience of the achievement of stone means that all that is separate is absorbed. So those people who are joining us, you and I, cease to be separate. We are the one thing, a glory of gold and of light, and of the dawn in the east, the bright golden dawn of the rising sun. And in that glory, matter is perfected. And it's difficult to think of that in Museum Street in 2021, when we are where we are. But that's what we hope.
You're beginning to make me wonder, did we ever fall?
Well, that's a very difficult theological concept to do so late on conversation. But yes, I mean, I think fall is separation, and at the moment of the gesture of Genesis, there was an instability that we understand as the fall from paradise, and that instability in Genesis and the Big Bang is what we're seeking to redress. But of course,
Was there a Big Bang?
well, there was a substantial noise, but
How do we know?
Well, but I think what we mistake is we experience the time from the Big Bang to now, from Genesis to where we are, as time, which of course is illusory. What we have to regain is the present moment, and in so doing, we actually recover the unity that we've lost. And the difference that we find exciting unites in the unity we find glorious. And I come back to the point, the mystery of the one thing. When we achieve the stone, we as the operator making that gesture become one with the matter that becomes the tinging stone of the quintessence.
May I suggest that
Please do.
we drink to
Well, I think
the
shall we?
agape?
Yeah, I think we should drink to Erik Satie, because he composed an extraordinary piece of music called The Air of the Order, which is the music played during the Rose Choir meetings under Paladin. And it actually, whilst it has that lingering tone of all of what he's written, recaptures the timing and the music of the Rose Choir. And if you're ever in, I have to say, if you ever get into Honfleur, the Satie Museum is well worth a visit.
Oh, I'd love to go there. To the great work.
It's a great work.
Hello everybody, thanks very much for your patience with us. It gives me great pleasure now to hand over to Samuel Robinson, who has a talk and an exploration of the work of Alois Mailander, isn't it?
Alois Mailander.
Alois Mailander. So over to you, Sam. Thank you very much.
Great. Hi. So I am Samuel Robinson, and I'm going to present some things about Alois Mailander to provide some quality information about who he really was. There's been some great interest online in this character because, let's say, after his death, he was maybe magnified a bit. The idea that there was a reincarnation of John on the scene sort of got projected on a level where you might sort of imagine maybe he was a kind of guru or theosophical master. Now, where I like to start things with Mailander is to tell the story about him as reported by his students. Now, what I've done is brought together a lot of research with the help of Erik Satie and Christine Eicher. We were a small team who worked through the time of COVID lockdowns to bring all this information to you. So out of the interesting stories reported from Mailander's students, he had a lot of experiences with members of the Theosophical Society, and of those we see Gustav Meyrink, the author of The Golden of Prague. We see Franz Hartmann, who travelled with Madame Blavatsky. And another interesting student of Mailander as well was Karl Kellner, the founder of the OTO and those Masonic lodges with Theodore Royce. Now, Hartmann tells us a kind of mystical encounter he has with Mailander. He says, I met this Rosicrucian, who's a real Rosicrucian, and I was astounded because he says, when I was over with Madame Blavatsky in Adia, in India, it was December 1st, 1884. A serpent came to his bedside. He was in his room doing some exercises, and he looked into the head of the serpent. And there he saw the face of a man. And when he came into contact with these Rosicrucians in Kempton, he immediately recognized Mailander's face. And he knew, through the symbolism of the serpent, that he would learn great things from Mailander as well. Now, Hartmann said another interesting thing he published in a Theosophical magazine. He said, in my heart, I had a secret initiatory word, and I kept this word secret all of my life. It was growing within me like a flowering seed into something special. But again, he would never tell anyone this word, and he says, I would never still tell anyone now. And he then goes on to say, when I met this man, Alois Mailander, he immediately spoke the secret word to me and welcomes me into their circle as if I was not a stranger to them. So I find such stories demonstrate what people were experiencing with Mailander, and they came to know him as a Rosicrucian seer. Now, why he's so interesting is when we talk about Rosicrucianism, normally you don't get to hear about secret chiefs or invisible adepts and so on. You know, you have the founding of different Rosicrucian fraternities, and normally somewhere in the background there's some secret adepts that are normally not named. Westcott and Mathers claimed to have secret chiefs as well. So did Harvey Spencer Lewis when he founded Amorc. He said there were some Rosicrucian leaders who sent him on a mission from France. Same for Paul Foster Case with his Rosicrucian guide as well. But in these instances, we don't actually get to see who these unnamed invisible Rosicrucian guides really are. So the telling of Mailander's story is the rediscovery of a forgotten Rosicrucian lineage, which is quite interesting. And secondly, it's a story of how he became a invisible master or guide behind the Theosophical Society. So those are the two things I'll focus on, as well as his teachings and the practical method he was giving. Now, to understand Mailander, I just wanted to quickly tell you about the atmosphere where he was living. He was born in Kempton in 1843. Now, in Kempton there was a lot going on that gave him his spiritual lineage, because it would be a mistake to imagine he was just a self-awakened man who suddenly had his own revelation that was spontaneous. He did have an awakening, but actually behind him is a Rosicrucian heritage given to him as well. Now, in Kempton, where he's born, there's a pilgrim's trail going 15 kilometers north from Kempton. You go by foot to 3 churches, and at these churches miracles happened. And these miracles are tied to Mailander's circle. The first of these is in a church in Altusried. Now, in 1845, a farmer and a merchant looked down on the snow around the church, and there they saw a whole bunch of symbols engraved into the snow. Can we just put on the first slide, Sheen?
Yes, it's there.
Thank you. Now, this painting that you see is actually what's inside that church, and that commemorates the 1845 miracle, which was in the second year of Mailander's life, in his birth month. And the symbols on the snow were considered a miracle because there were no footprints to account for how they could have got there, or animal tracks. And using a bit of scholarship from Erik and Christine, and we put together the information and realized we're actually able to put Mailander's Rosicrucian initiator on the scene and recognize that the farmer who witnessed that miracle in 1845 actually was Mailander's own initiator. Now, the second church, just going north of Kempton, is called the Church of the Holy Cross. And there we see in 1691, it was witnessed that 5 spurts of blood gushed up from the ground, and these were related to the 5 wounds of Christ. So this was considered another miracle in the area. And these churches are tied to Mailander's circle. The reason being, Mailander was actually telling people that it was Paracelsus who actually sprinkled the red tincture, or the elixir of life, around the church, and that's why these 5 spurts of blood were coming up from the ground. And Mailander and many others said, well, we've also seen this ourselves in our own lifetime. Now, what's going on there is, on one side we have a church miracle, and on the other side we have Mailander saying, well, actually we know Paracelsus did this. So what Mailander and Prestel are essentially doing is giving the miracle a kind of prequel story and accounting for what they considered to be its actual alchemical origins, which I find quite interesting. Now, Prestel, this guy who was Mailander's initiator, we learn from Karl Weinfurter who was a theosophist in Prague, that Prestel was actually with Mailander in his youth, as well as the other Rosicrucian guide, Gabella. So Gabella was Mailander's brother-in-law, and these two boys grew up to become kind of Rosicrucian seers or prophets in Germany. Now, Gabella was given the spiritual name of Solomon, named after King Solomon, and Mailander would be called John. So I find the whole thing about German mysticism quite significant because, we know a lot about French mysticism today. The Anglo-American occult scene is quite widely published. And when I got to Germany, I was a bit naive and thought, maybe I can find real Rosicrucians over here, and started getting around asking questions. And that led to the discovery of Mailander and the tradition of Koning and some quite obscure things. Now, aside from these churches in Kempten, what's interesting is that the region was quite Catholic, but also there was a pietistic movement going on before Mailander was born. Kempten, which is his birth town, was swept up in the Algoy revival movement. Now, many Catholics had taken up this pietistic, enthusiastic, mystical Christianity. And the reason I mention this is because in Kempten there was a group called the Awakened Brethren, and they were started by Martin Boos in 1790. And Boos, it's clear his circle of the Awakened Brethren actually influenced Mailander's group. So he was teaching things like the members had biblical names, for example. His own biblical name was Joseph, after the biblical father of Christ. And in his group were two women who were given the title of Maria. Now, they're quite unusual, as they were called the living wombs of Mary on earth. They were also called birthing mothers. Okay, so in that pietistic movement, they believed that just as you had to have the Virgin Mary to give birth to Christ, they saw that these two, or one of these two women, had to be present so that she could give birth to Christ in you. So they were a kind of spiritual pregnancy or womb gathering of the powers of the Virgin on earth, and they would awaken Christ as the I in you. So in Kempten, they had female initiators, and women had a quite significant role. And I mention this because in Mailander's Rosicrucian group, we also see women had a significant role as well, and again they used biblical names. Martin Boos was teaching the baptism of water, blood and fire. These are also things we see in Mailander's group. Mailander's group was called the Bund der Verheißung, which means the covenant of promise. So it was pietistic, but what this tells us is Mailander's origins go right back, to the 1790s, to a theosopher movement. He did have a Rosicrucian initiator. Now, going back to Prestel, who was Mailander's initiator, the stories about him are quite unusual. Hartmann recorded a few of them. He says, for example, that Hartmann had actually a brass cross he had from Prestel, because Prestel was known to be doing alchemical experiments, and this cross never tarnished because it was considered to be transmuted metal. So Hartmann said it's as shiny as the day it was cast. It will never corrode from these alchemical experiments Prestel did. Prestel was once attacked, according to the stories, ambushed by some kind of person who wanted to steal something, I guess. And what happened was, according to the Theosophers, Prestel had the power to project images outside of himself that others could visibly see. I think they called it phantasma at the time. Now, and you could objectively behold these things. And when Prestel was attacked, the criminal saw a series of scaffolds and the gallows and nooses for hanging, and he ran off in terror. And apparently Prestel never told anyone about this. It was the criminal himself who basically went around like a lunatic explaining what happened. So this Prestel actually is quite a enigma, because at the time you normally wouldn't see Rosicrucian alchemists still around in the mid-1800s. This is because the Golden Rosenkreuz had fallen out of favour in the late 1700s, and the name Rosenkreuz had almost become something of ridicule in the occult scene. It wasn't popular at all, but here we have Prestel initiating and guiding Mailander and his brother-in-law from their youth. And the last interesting story we know about Prestel is that he kept by the fireside, or actually in his kitchen. It's kind of a kitchen oven they used to have in Germany. And there was a glass alchemical vessel, and inside it was some grey-blue crystalline salts that he was using to prepare the tincture. And one day, while some people were present, the crystals moved and actually formed the shape of a serpent that was spiraling inside the bottle. And it really crystallized into a blue serpent at that point, and that's when Prestel announced, "Oh, I see, I'm going to die soon." And then he did actually die, according to the stories. So that pretty much shows us Mailander's spiritual origins. And again, it's quite unusual, because what it means, in my mind, is that when Mailander went on to adopt members of the Theosophical Society, it's almost like the intersection of the old and the new, because he clearly had an older lineage, and at that time Blavatsky and different occult things were coming onto the scene, and it now appears quite clear that some of those Theosophists inherited a real Rosicrucian tradition. So who was Mailander? It was quite hard to find out, simply because there's not much material about him, and at the same time everyone wants to know. So there were 2 items of interest that have been published. Roger Heil published 5 pages. Emil Bock is Rudolf Steiner's biographer, and he published a total of 11 pages. The problem here was that you can't really find out much about Mailander from the information they gave. It's almost like Mailander is a background figure of lesser significance if you read Emil Bock, whereas from Roger Heil at least we see, well, okay, Mailander was a master behind the Theosophical Society. Now, what Emil Bock tells us is that Mailander had an awakening in 1877. He was 33 years old when his brother-in-law was with their spiritual circle, which was made up of factory workers, their husbands and wives at the silk factory, weaving factory in Kempton. There they would give Christian-type enthusiastic sermons. Kabbalah was preaching at that time, and a spiritual awakening fell on the then 33-year-old Alois Mailander. From that point forward, he was known as a Christian seer. So, like I said, it's been very hard to find information. Fortunately, thanks to Erik, the Luhaika, and Christine, who formed our team, Erik donated the unpublished notebooks of Hübschleiden, and Christine could read the handwriting of Hübschleiden, which is a miracle in itself. We were able to find out a lot more information, such as obtaining a complete copy of Mailander's soul teaching. This is his own Rosicrucian lecture on his tradition, and a second lecture comes with it called the form teaching. And these are put into my book in complete form and will publish in about 1 month. That's a series of 437 spiritual statements where Mailander just basically describes the keys to his spiritual alchemy. It's a simple rudimentary text. You wouldn't say it's too complex or anything like that, but what it is a dialogue on the interaction between the soul, the spirit and the body, and how to awaken the word. Now, more importantly though, in the unpublished materials, we were able to clearly identify which books influenced Mailander, and 2 of them particularly stand out. The first is the writings of Jane Lead, who was a spiritual visionary. She witnessed the Virgin, and the Christ and the Virgin spoke through her, and she recorded those writings, and she gave her own spiritual alchemy. And the second interesting author was J.B. Koenig, the mystical Freemason from Germany as well. He was also teaching the awakening of the inner word through the body, and he was using the alphabet, syllables, and then complete words on the body to nourish the body with sounds so that you would obtain a sense of the inner language from yourself as well. So these two authors, Jane Lead and Koenig, were a big influence on Mailander, and I write about that quite a lot, and we'll explain why in a moment. Now, what the question was, though, many people would ask, well, hang on a minute, how can these books be read by Mailander? He's meant to be this illiterate weaver. It's quite clear that, yes, he was illiterate, but he also left strange comments like this book by Koenig is better than that one. So he definitely somehow read them. And when I say read, I imagine his spiritual circle had group hearings or sittings, and he was able to hear the content himself and really absorb the content and gain something from it. Now, regarding their original circle, like I said, they had biblical names, just like the circle of Martin Boos, and we were able, through the unpublished content, to find out even more of the biblical names from the Theosophists who joined Mailander. So we already knew from Erik's book, covering the 44 letters from Mailander, that Gustav Meyrink was called Reuben in that circle, or Reuben ben Judah. Franz Hartmann was called Emmanuel, that was his biblical name. And there's another figure that came up in the notebooks. It was Gunther Wagner, who actually was called Tobias by Mailander. Now he's interesting because he went on to become a significant student of Rudolf Steiner. So there we start to see some crossover as to how some information likely passed hands. Now, I had the good fortune of actually living just where Mailander lived, because my partner's from down there, as luck would have it. And if you know the area of Kempten, it's literally stunning. And there's Oberstdorf just nearby. It's an area for ski jumping. It's in the best part of Germany when it comes to, accessing the Alps and having, fresh air and stuff like that. So that led me to ask, well, why would Mailander ever leave Kempten? It's just such a beautiful spot. And Franz Hartmann also left an interesting note about some power that prevented Mailander from leaving. And he writes the following. He says of Mailander and Gabella, as the two spiritual leaders, they had repeatedly received offers of better situations, but refused them, saying that they were not permitted to change. Now, we don't know what, he doesn't say what prevented them from leaving, but Karl Weinfurter, who was from the Prague Theosophical Lodge with Gustav Meyrink, he actually shows us what really happened, why they couldn't leave. And the answer is as follows. They were both employed in a big weaving factory, and they were very poor indeed. One Saturday, when they were leaving the factory, they walked home together, and all of a sudden the leader informed his relation of his having given notice. To this, his relation replied, "So did I." They were both induced to do so by their inner word. Though they did not know what they should live on, yet they obeyed the command without any objections, and did what they had been asked to do. But their uncertainty did not last long. The following day, the leader was already proprietor of a handsome country house, the gift of a rich lady, a pupil of his. Now, he doesn't say who this rich lady was. Fortunately, we do know her name. Through Roger Heil, we know that Mary Gebhardt actually was the lady mentioned by Weinfurter. Now, Mary Gebhardt's really interesting too, because she established the very first Theosophical Lodge in Germany. So she was in deep with Madame Blavatsky. Now, she was wealthy. She was the wife of the owner of a silk factory. He was also the owner of his own part of a bank. So she could afford to study occultism all out. And she was actually formerly the student of Eliphas Levi, the French occultist. Now, when Mailander came to Mary Gebhardt's house, it was actually that Mailander was now staying in the very same house where Levi previously had stayed as well. So she really had the best pick of esoteric teachers. What stood out when I looked at the dates of this Theosophical Lodge, they actually closed their doors in December 31, 1886. And then all of a sudden I got a note from a city council in Germany that showed Mailander literally had arrived to her house only 2 days before they closed the Theosophical Lodge. So this really stuck out in my mind. And it's quite clear that the closing of this lodge signaled that Mary Gebhard had found her new master after Eliphas Levi, but also there was nothing wrong with the lodge. They had 13 active members, and what it really was about was there were two scandals in the Theosophical Society. There was the Cologne Affair of 1884 and the Hodgson Report of 1885. Madame Blavatsky had recently been at that same house in 1886 trying to convince the lodge to stay, but they didn't stay. What this all ultimately means is that the German Theosophical Society had obtained its new master. Blavatsky had her masters, now they had a Rosicrucian one, and they had the means to sponsor him. So this meant that the German Theosophists now, instead of pursuing Western mysticism, took up the Western path instead of the Eastern. Now, where this all leads is the introduction of Gustav Meyrink, who's an interesting character. How did he meet Mailander? And he shares a similar story as that of Hartmann. He had a prophecy given to him from within the Theosophical Society that he would somehow find a special guru that would change his life and help him. And it hadn't yet come true. He was meditating in Prague on this very subject. How will I find my guru? What's going to happen for me? And he went deeply into it. And he wrote that on his way home, a green fiery light shot down from the earth and hit the earth in front of him, and it formed the shape of a fiery green anchor for his eyes. And he was astounded at this. He didn't know what it meant. But shortly after, he was given a notice to come to see Friedrich Eckstein. And Friedrich Eckstein was the leader of the Vienna Theosophical Lodge. And there he learned about Mailander for the first time. And actually, it came to Meyrink as a shock because Eckstein had been his friend for a very long time. And it was like a kind of slap in the face, or it struck him as lightning, as he put it, because Eckstein had never mentioned that such a secret Rosicrucian teacher existed behind the scenes. And when he now came to apply for membership, actually Eckstein already had a telegram issued by Mailander saying that he accepted the new student, and that new student was Meyrink. Now the thing is, when Meyrink looked at the date, he realized that this had been sent already before his arrival, before he would even apply, and the telegram, the issue of it coincided with the date of the fiery green anchor that hit the ground in front of him. He mentioned this to Eckstein, and Eckstein basically assures him, well, that's because Mailander is a real Rosicrucian seer. He knows such things. So it looks like Mailander basically expected Meyrink to show up at this time. Now, Meyrink left a lecture called The Transfiguration of the Blood, and there's so many interesting notes about Mailander's path in there, but he also says that he got to know at least 54 other theosophists who were studying with Mailander. Okay, so some of them were even coming as far as England to come and learn from Mailander as well. So all that time, they were keeping Mailander secret. And even then, not all of them could just simply join Mailander. He would consult his inner word to decide, should I teach the student or not? And his inner word would answer. He did this in front of his house in a rose garden. And at some point, his inner word would tell him, help this person. So that's what he did. And he started to issue mystical sentences or mantras to guide them. Now, what actually is strange about what Mailander does now, he actually joins the Theosophical Society himself. And it would be a mistake to imagine he's now a student of Theosophy, because it's clear actually he joined to help the Theosophists from inside. And he had some quite negative views about the Theosophical Society. And I wrote down a couple of them. One of them was recorded by Emil Bock, Steiner's biographer. And this is what Mailander said: Mrs. Blavatsky, as well as Colonel Olcott, and the former envoy, Dr. Hartmann, are as much use to us as a Munich milkmaid who pushes along the milk cart. Okay? And Huberschleiden also writes down a note about Mailander saying, he claims to have the definite impression that she will be exposed as a fraud in future. There, it's quite clear Mailander was talking about Annie Besant, who was Blavatsky's successor. And, so there is some contrast. Mailander's in the Theosophical Society, they're keeping him secret, and, the hardest part was to really piece together his story, because none of them openly mention Mailander, in fact. If you look at Hartmann and his articles, he calls Mailander in public just the German adept, or this unlearned person, or this illiterate weaver. We have many examples like that. In Meyrink's own notebooks, he only uses the letter J, because he's referring to John. So everyone literally kept their oaths and never mentioned Mailander in public. It was only through Huberschleiden's notebooks that the name John and Mailander are brought together. And that's why we're able to unravel the full story and now piece together different items that were in public that didn't seem to really mention anyone significant. But now we know this piece and this magazine item, this book, all of it is put together as samples or words from Mailander himself. So that's what I've basically done in my book, but I've brought today what I consider the cream of his teachings and tried to distill it into something that's hopefully good for scholars, but also, more importantly, practical, as is the focus today. So, next slide. We're going to have a look at what did Mailander really teach. So, first of all, his soul teaching. I mentioned this lecture of his. There he talks about the interaction between the soul and the will and the heart. And ultimately, he's giving us an instruction manual on understanding ourselves and our inner properties. And these are statements that we should really contemplate, as simple as they might seem. Sometimes we get carried away with intellectual things, as was said before. Here we can take very simple statements and delve deeply into the feeling of what it should really mean when we feel it, rather than think about it. And I think that's the purpose of his soul teaching. Now, there are some quite, let's say, traditional Rosicrucian things he taught. I've complained on my blog a few times about the problem of Gnosticism and how sometimes the Gnostics said nature was evil, or it's some kind of prison that we have to escape from. Well, Mailander didn't teach that. He was very much about being here in this reality, and it's actually for a purpose, and it's a divine purpose. And he also rejected the concept of leaving the body. So he was very much saying we're here in this reality for a reason. So Meyrink left a commentary, and Meyrink says, here's one thing I learned from Mailander. He writes, there is in fact a method of leaving the body during one's lifetime, as common among occultists who consider it, so to speak, an initiation. In reality, it is the worst schizophrenia imaginable. So Mailander was really against astral projection, okay? And he gives a good reason. Meyrink says in his Transfiguration of the Blood the following: the doctrine of that Hessian simple man culminated in this: the soul of man lives in the body, not to leave it as one who spins around to see that he has fallen into a dead end, but rather it is to transform the matter in which we are born. He also goes on to say, he resembled in many of his experiences the seer Jakob Boehmer, who today is known to every educated person as a wonderful person, but he surpassed him as a clairvoyant in many respects, but sky high he surpassed him through the mentioned realization that leaving the world is wrong, however sublime this escape from the world may seem. Okay, so Mailander, when I talk about that, I like to mention how Daniel Mergling in the 1600s, in his Rosicrucian treatise of 1618, it's called the Pegasus, he talks about the Gospel and the Book of Nature, and he goes so far to say that reading the Book of Nature is higher than the Gospel in Rosicrucianism. And that's something which echoes in Mailander's teaching as well. And, the Rosicrucians were interested in science and studying nature. So there's a very realistic approach Mailander is giving in his spiritual alchemy. Another key from Mailander's teaching is that something must come from outside of ourselves to complete the work. Now, here he's talking about the illusion that we can see in occultism today, that we might learn special occult skills, or maybe we have our magical tools, or we spend time developing our concentration, or exercises for developing the willpower. That's great and important, and part of it, yes, but Mailander ultimately said something must come from outside of yourself, that thing being help from Jesus Christ. Now, not everyone's Christian, of course. It might be some other guide from outside, but ultimately Mailander saw Christ as the initiator that helps you in your spiritual work, not only within that moment when you're doing the exercise, but also in your whole life. So here we're developing an awareness of either the Holy Spirit or Christ actually being the mechanic or alchemist in your life, doing things to you in your life that help your spiritual progress in the exercises. So there's not this separation where we lock ourselves in a room for 20 minutes or an hour. Actually, it's a complete lifestyle and developing the awareness of this divine aid coming to you. Another special doctrine, which is one of my favorites from Mailander, he was telling his students, don't worship or stick with the crucified Christ. Okay? Now, when he says that, he's saying if you stick with the crucified Christ, you'll only end up suffering with him. He pointed to a few people who had stigmatas, and he said, look at these poor people. They go around and round in circles, they have holes in their hands, they're always suffering. People think it's great, but they're just going to suffer forever. And Mailander actually commented on this in his final typoscript. He realized and finished this lesson. He said, I have to take Christ down off the cross, and I have to re-robe him and make him the champion of my life. And he was referring to Mailander's doctrine that instead of worshipping the crucified Christ, he wanted his students to worship and be one with the resurrected Christ. Okay? I mention this because it is quite similar in some ways to some of Aleister Crowley's ideas and his complaints about the Eon of Osiris and suffering with Osiris and taking up the Eon of Horus or being one with the champion risen god. And yet Mailander, we know he was Karl Kellner's teacher, the founder of the OTO, but ultimately I believe Mailander was already teaching these doctrines before Crowley, and in the 1880s as well. So it's quite significant. Now, I mentioned Jane Lead before, because Jane Lead was an influence on Mailander, and she was teaching these ideas, and she basically says it very well. The crucified Christ is a form that takes you through your spiritual death. Then she says Christ will give you his second body, the resurrected golden body, which is also a new supper, and you will nourish yourself with this new body and be regenerated in its golden light. And then after that you will attain a third body, which she says is a body which is fit for ascension. So she actually takes you through the different Christ states, and that's one of my opinions or theories that I put forward, that she was a major influence on Mailander's, not only his spiritual alchemy, but on his doctrines as well. Thirdly, one of the other favourite things from Mailander we learn, he tried to comfort his students because some of them were suffering in life. You see this in the 44 letters that Erik published. Now, what Mailander was telling his students repeatedly is that all of our sufferings have a purpose. He goes so far to say that these sufferings are actually a purification preparing you for your spiritual rebirth. And again, here we see a nice example of Mailander teaching that his occult exercises are not separate from life. Okay, so all of these things we suffer, the challenges we have, he's saying, listen to the compass of the heart, ask what we're supposed to be learning from this, time of hardship, whatever it is. We all have such times in our life, and if we can listen to our heart, either we'll get out of it or come out of it in a smoother way. And again, ultimately, he saw this as leading towards our rebirth. But for Mailander, this is a bodily rebirth, and that the bodily rebirth actually comes hand in hand with the spiritual rebirth as well. Now, I've got these quotes on his spiritual alchemy, which help one practice, let's say. Weinfurter actually said the following: the spiritual practice imparted by this leader was identical with that of J.B. Koenig. So Koenig's interesting, and he's another thing getting popular that's coming out of Germany. And so many groups are using him. We even have people taking the statements of Nietzsche and practicing those on the body to awaken the Übermensch. I mean, there's some very exotic, obscure stuff coming out of Germany, but Koenig's normally tied to it. Mailander is one of the practitioners of Koenig, I would say, but his the statement that his method is identical with that of Koenig is incorrect. Weinfurter was wrong. Mailander actually had different things to offer. So, are we on the slide with the heart practice and
Heart practice.
Oh, good. So the three main things I try to boil it down to are the heart practice. Then we have the transmutation of the blood and the signs of progression. Okay? Now, what Mailander was doing in practice, he was using his inner word and seership to help people. Okay? And his inner word would give mantras or spiritual statements for you to practice. You should be engrossed with these. And when certain signs of progression would come along, he would give his students a new sentence. Okay? And these sentences were never for anybody else, they were just for you. And there's one example where Huber Schleiden even is giving the mantras he's supposed to be practicing to one of his friends, and his friend starts to use them and falls into some physical harm and some stress in his life as well. Mailander explains, well, you shouldn't have given him your mantras. So these are special remedial sentences developed just for you and your path. And Mailander knew that with his seership. And what I want to basically share right now is one of the examples of a Mailander teaching hidden in plain sight. Franz Hartmann, in his Magic White and Black, mentions the teachings of one unlearned person. So, again, it's been sitting in front of everyone's eyes, and this is literally from Mailander. Here's what he writes. Let us compare these statements. Let us compare with these statements one received from an unlearned person who possesses the power to see interior truths. He says, sink your thoughts downward into the center of your being, and you will find there a germ which, if continually nourished by pure and holy thoughts, will grow into a power that will extend and ramify through all parts of your body. Your hands and your feet and your interior organs will become alive. A sun will appear within your heart and illuminate your whole being. In this light you will see the present, the past and the future, and by its aid you will attain the true knowledge of the self. Now, this heart mysticism is clearly different from Koenig. Koenig, it's assumed that actually his mysticism starts at the feet, and that's not true. Koenig opens up the neck, the heart and the body, and then goes down to the feet to build up the new body of light. Mailander is similar, but he just goes direct to the heart, okay, and then downwards, and then from the feet up. So it's a simplification. And anyway, Koenig had a second variant of his teaching, which I call his public system, and that's the one Mailander was drawing from, which is in some of Koenig's books. And there Koenig is telling the reader to use the sentences of the Lord's Prayer as mantras, and you can use that to go down the body to achieve the what he called the washing of the feet, or the watery baptism, which is the descent of the astral light. So head going down and then feet going up, that's the basics of it. Now, Meyrink's 44 letters from Mailander preserve some of these special statements Mailander gave to Meyrink. And one of them was, Our Father, who art in heaven, sustain your servant. Again, this is something that was meant for Meyrink, so I wouldn't recommend going through that book and picking out these sentences and practicing them for yourself. But they are nice examples of the mysticism and spiritual alchemy and what you're supposed to do. Now, another example of Mailander's teachings hidden in plain sight appears in Gustav Meyrink's novel, The Green Face. Here, Meyrink quotes Mailander directly, and The Green Face reads, Now there is a secret power inherent in every name, and if we speak this name into our heart with closed lips incessantly until it constantly fills our being for day and night, we draw the spiritual power into our blood, which, if circulating in the veins, changes our body with time. Here, again, Meyrink's saying day and night rather than an enclosed, closeted practice for, let's say, 20 minutes to an hour. So I find Mailander's system a body awareness that is actually done throughout the day rather than in isolated moments. And lastly, I just wanted to point out with the giving of these sentences, Mailander went so far to say that this man over here who has achieved the inner word shouldn't be helping others because he only has the inner word. The inner word, according to Mailander, was your inner voice and a part of Christ speaking through you, and it would guide your own spiritual destiny. But that didn't mean that this particular person who had the inner word could guide others. Mailander's distinction was that someone who had the perfect gift wasn't only a seer for his own or her own self, but actually had the seership to understand the destiny and what other people needed. So this perfect gift was the special thing Mailander had. Now, this of the three baptisms, of the water, blood and fire, the water one is quite easy to summarize, and how I like to explain it is that, you have poetic revelations, trance states, visionary experiences, or even the descent of the astral light, when it shivers down the body and shoots down even your spine, the hairs stand up. A lot of this can be an effect of magical work or visionary work. All of that, coincidences or special psychic dreams, all of that stuff falls under the category of Koenig and Mailander's watery baptism. And ultimately, that stuff's something we can achieve through most paths, but what Mailander is saying, if you have these revelations, poetic, noetic, psychic or whatever, he's saying now draw it deeper into your body, draw it into the blood. That's the next step. So I sort of find in some way Mailander goes a bit further, and his bodily awareness is what he was trying to contribute to the Theosophist. And many Theosophists actually called Mailander's system yoga, simply because they were into Eastern things, but it really was a bodily spiritual alchemy. Now, Koenig was saying something quite strange, because with this blood baptism, Koenig was saying, well, you have to go through the baptism of Christ, the washing of the feet, the bearing of the cross, the scourging, whipping, the crown of thorns, the nails, the crucifixion, all of it. But Koenig doesn't really say how. And the question is this a symbolic experience? Is it just a consciousness? We talk about the death of the old self and the rebirth of the new. And again, for Mailander, the answer is no, it's not just symbolic. This is, again, a bodily experience. And this is where this baptism of the blood comes into play. Because by sinking and drawing our spiritual experiences into the blood, we would then start to see this transformation. And Mailander, in his soul teaching, gives us some nice sentences that explain this very well. I'll give you two sentences from the soul teaching. The 26th statement is, in the outer man, the blood is the will over the flesh, and in the inner man, the word of God is the power over the flesh and blood. Secondly, the 52nd statement, the goddess Fluda will give birth through the head. That is to say, when the seed is drawn and placed in the head, which impregnates the blood of both the man and the woman, because both of their bodies are female and capable of giving birth according to the will of the Spirit for the glory and honor of God. So that basically explains that there's a sinking of our consciousness, our mystical experience into the blood. And that's why, it goes further than this concept of just Christ consciousness or the Christ experience, because again, it's all brought as a bodily experience, fully manifested, we would say. Lastly, there's these signs of progression. Karl Weinfurter talks about this. He basically writes, I'll go a bit quicker and shorten this. Essentially, he says that letters, symbols, and signs will appear during the baptism of the blood. And these signs will be visible on the skin for anyone to see. He says you shouldn't show these to non-believers or people who might profane this, because actually others will be able to see it. And they might happen at any time. Some of these occurrences will be strange manifestation. Maybe the blowing of an air upon you when the doors are closed. maybe some pains appearing in the feet, or different strange manifestations on the body. But in most cases, some symbols would appear on the body. And these were all indicative of the transfiguration and baptism of the blood, according to Mailander's system. These he called crucifixion signs, or geistige Vorgänge, which means spiritual processes, meaning, again, by processes he didn't mean things to do, but things that happen to you, the Holy Spirit working on you. So there's quite a different approach in Mailander's mysticism. It's less self-willing, we should say. Hartmann explains the keys to why are these symbols appearing on the skin, and why is the blood doing all this in Mailander's system. He says the soul expresses itself in forms and images, and if we learn to read these pictures correctly, we may know the state of our interior condition and act so to improve it accordingly. So there, the soul's showing itself. Mailander was recognizing the signs and therefore giving new sentences. Now, to complete his system, Mailander actually gave a thing called the form teaching. That's the second part of the soul teaching. And actually what it is a register of these strange symbols that appear on the skin. So he talks about numbers, letters, different flags, crowns, fish, boats, whatever. And he gives the meaning, so that obviously after he's died, people would know what to do. This soul teaching and form teaching was completely secret. The Theosophists could only circulate it in secret. They were not even allowed to make copies. Mailander would tell them, now you may make copies for this other person, and so on. And Weinfurter actually, in his book, expanded the register of symbols in his Mystische Fibel. And again, that's an example of Mailander's teachings in plain sight. He gave a whole lot of extra symbols to continue that teaching. Now, just lastly, what I wanted to say about the genius of Mailander's system is that, in my opinion, he's completed Koenig's system by bringing in this blood baptism, because before it was only symbolic. This blood baptism, in my opinion, also comes from Jane Lead. She actually describes it as dying marks. So Mailander's saying crucifixion marks, she's saying dying marks. And she says that they may be recognized as a true identifying mark of a dying soul to the self, whereby a person must conclude that the perfecting and accomplishment of this dying is by steps gradually being granted, wherein the soul must become the sin sacrifice in its own person and bear the marks and signs of this dying life. So I'm of the opinion that Mailander saw Jane Lead's system and used that to complete Koenig, because it was symbolic, let's say, or not complete. At the same time, Jane Lead didn't say how to recognize these dying marks. She said that there will be characters you can read, but she didn't give a register of how to interpret those symbols. And that's why I'm also of the opinion that Mailander not only completed Koenig's mysticism, he even went so far as to complete Jane Lee's system as well. So I think he's a kind of spiritual genius in that way. And even if you wouldn't call him one of the last Rosicrucians, without doubt he would be one of the last Theosophists. And by that I mean in the spirit of Jane Lead and Jakob Boehmer. Okay, so that concludes my introduction to the history, his story and his life, and the theory behind his practice. So, do we have time to do a meditation? Yeah?
I think so, yes.
We do. Okay, thank you. Now, these practices are things that we can do all at once, but actually you would work on them through the whole day or through the whole month, even across the whole year. To cram-pack them into one system will teach the principles you can use, but again, you should spread them out and spend moments working on just one part at a time, okay? And one of the complaints Mairing had was he did it for 13 years and nothing happened. And that's because, well, a lot of people want bells and whistles from their esoteric exercises. They're looking for that shock effect or some manifestations. Most of what we do in Mailander's system, the crucifixion, pains, the manifestations happen outside the exercise, okay? And just to quickly tell you how I see the exercise, Qigong is quite similar, but with Qigong you're using Qi and building that up in the body. I like to describe Mailander's system as, instead of using Qi, we're looking at faith in the body, okay? And the influence of, as he said, Christ working upon you, and the amount of faith you can bring into the body through that blood transmutation brings the success. Okay, so that's dependent on you and your belief and where you're going in your life. So in that respect, it's a bodily, enthusiastic, mystical Christianity. Okay, so the mantras I've got there for you, I just say mantras because it's quicker. The first one is, the Holy Spirit must birth it, I cannot will it. Okay, we'll practice that in terms of breathing into the body and being aware of the Holy Spirit. Secondly, we have an exercise for gathering your vital essence back to the heart. That's where we're going to practice I must decrease and he must increase. That's the expansion of the heart. So you're gathering your forces back to the heart and expanding the heart itself. These statements are thought into the body and silently said rather than spoken. So if you want to practice it, we'll go right now. If you like, close your eyes. Okay. I recommend you just start to feel up above you and aspire to the holy light, and start to imagine the highest sense of the light and say mentally out to the atmosphere above you, the Holy Spirit must birth it. When you think that out into the cosmos, you then sink and draw in your breath, sink into the body, and become present in your body, aware of your feet, to your head, the tip of your nose, your fingertips, your toes. And that's when you think into the body, I cannot will it. This is the way to attain the watery baptism. Breathe in and draw down, the Holy Spirit must birth it. Sink into the body, I cannot will it. Just spend a moment thinking these two thoughts. Now, if it feels right, imagine that the atmosphere of the Holy Spirit must birth it, surrounding the body and coming near to the body and even into the body and enclosing the body. Breathe inwards when you think the thought, the Holy Spirit must birth it. Soften the body with, I cannot will it. And whenever you get stuck during the exercise, you can always quickly go back to these two thoughts to draw down the holy presence. Now, feel the end of your left foot, go to the toes, and with the indrawing breath, breathe up your vital forces and the bodily will of the foot and the will of the leg and the will of the thigh, everything from your left side going up to the heart. Breathe out at the heart and expand the heart's atmosphere. Expand the heat of the heart on the out breath. Do this again from the left foot. Breathe in, going up, gathering your forces to your heart. Do this for the right foot, breathing in. Make the heart atmosphere something quite solid. Do this for the left hand, starting at the fingertips. Breathe in. Draw yourself back to your heart. Absorb the will of the left arm and hand. Feel the right hand. Repeat the same, gathering your forces to the heart. Now the torso, the back, the spine, the neck and the head. Breathe this in and compress it into the heart with the out breath. Now repeat this process, starting at the left foot, but as you draw up from the left foot, you will think the word on the in-breath, I must decrease. When you get to the heart and breathe out and expand the heart atmosphere, you will think the words, he must increase. If you're not comfortable with Christ or he, use the word. So you will say, I must decrease, the word must increase, if that suits you better. Do this for the left leg, left arm and right arm, again the back, the neck, the head, compressing it all into the heart. I'll give you a moment to do this. I must decrease. He must increase. Now we will repeat the same, but this time through all the limbs, all at once. From both toes, from each foot, from both hands, from all the fingers, all at once. Breathing in with I must decrease, gathering all your forces. And expanding the heart atmosphere now with he must increase. And now as you expand the heart, it will spread across the entire body as the subtle matrix of the heart's true feeling and true atmosphere permeates the body itself. As you breathe in, I must decrease, the heart's warmth and soul feeling saturates and covers and washes over the body, so that each outgoing breath expands the heart's atmosphere over all the flesh. Do this 10 times. Make sure that the heart atmosphere and warmth of the heart really floods throughout the body on the out breath. You will start to feel the presence of the spirit in your blood, in its vibration and circulation. Now, when the matrix is opened, sink into the center of your heart, and if successful, it may be a sensitivity or a vulnerability in the way the heart has been opened over the body. Almost as if something could easily implant into the heart. You will now think the mantra of the day, which is, from the Father to the Holy Spirit, from the Holy Spirit to the Son. think this into the heart and feel as if the heart itself was moving, as if it had lips itself to speak it. From the Father to the Holy Spirit, from the Holy Spirit to the Son. Finally, you will use the mantra, not I, but Christ as the I in me. Repeat this 3 times as a thought into the heart. Not I, but Christ as the I in me. Now we will complete the final invocation of the presence of Christ in the body and complete the blood baptism. We will reverse the earlier mantra, and now from the heart you will expand down the left arm with I must increase, but you must decrease. The I must increase is the spreading of the presence of the heart once more through the blood of the left arm and out to the fingertips. And with you must decrease, feel it burn and impress itself into the limb. Now to the right side. I must increase, but you must decrease. Spreading the heart's awareness out to the limb. Now the same for the left and right legs, one after the other, going from the heart down. And also for the back, spine and head. I must increase, you must decrease. At this point, do this for the whole heart now, going out to the limbs and the head. Feel I must increase as the presence of the heart. Be present fully in the blood, going from the heart out to all the blood in the body. I must increase. Burn it into the flesh. You must decrease. Repeat 3 more times. Now to end, sink your consciousness down to your feet. Feel the weight of your body in your feet. And now just feel the skin on the soles of your feet. And that concludes the way we practice in Mailander's system.
name's Alex. I am the Chief Adept of the province of Greater London for the SRIA. And it has fallen, and it is my responsibility of closing today's rather wonderful proceedings. It has been such a wonderful afternoon. It has exceeded all of my expectations. I mean, it's just been absolutely wonderful. And, you know, as she mentioned, I know there's been a few little rough edges. We're not a professional production company. We're just a bunch of enthusiastic Rosicrucians. And whilst it has been rough on the edges, I'm sure you have enjoyed as much as I've enjoyed what has happened today. I'd like to thank personally on behalf of the Metropolitan Study Group, Geraldine and Beskin. Thank you very much. For allowing us to utilise the very sacred and honourable space that is the Atlantis Bookshop. I mean, please. Actually, when I told my daughter the history of the Atlantis Bookshop, you could see her little eyes light up, and she was expecting Dumbledore or Harry Potter to pop in for a book, and which I found out that actually J.K. Rowling does pop in from time to time. I want to say a very, very, very special thank you to Sam Robinson for that fascinating talk on Mailander. That wonderful practice. For those of you who don't know Sam, he runs the pansofas.com website, and I think it's possibly the finest online resource for all aspects of Rosicrucianism. I've often been sucked down its Elysian rabbit hole for many hours, and it's a treasure trove, and I thoroughly recommend it to any of you to let the rabbit lead you through its labyrinth. Thank you again, Sam.
Thank you.
I have to thank the members of Metropolitan College who worked tirelessly to manifest this, our first humble little salon. Sheen Towers for his introduction, his technical skills in leading the visual output, and his poor laptop is probably smoking as a result. Rob Gordon, who's watching from Italy, whose divinely inspired musical compositions have allowed us to breathe and enjoy the audio aspects of the divine. And may I say, Stephen Gorder and Lee Barlow, I mean, I didn't realise what Oscar-winning budding actors we have. I mean, just absolutely wonderful. I want to thank all of you for attending. Thank you so much. This has been our first outing, and it's something that's very close to our hearts. And the main thrust of us deciding to resurrect the ideas of the salons have come from a similarity in Péladan's thinking. I mean, if you look at Paris of the late 19th century, they basically instigated the salons in defiance to the cultural trends of materialism then. And those original salons contain many of the painters, the writers, the composers, the poets. And I mean, I know our merry little band can only aspire to something like that, but we share that sentiment. And I think that, personally, the act of creativity is an aspect of divinity in motion. All we have to do is look around us at the book of nature and see that the universe is one infinite explosion of creativity. And by being creative, we are honouring and manifesting the divine spark within. In this modern world, so much creativity is done for little imagination, for the Instagram like or the TikTok share. And I would like to think that today we have shown that we can have a little creative corner where we can work for a higher purpose.
Stick it on TikTok.
Yes, I'm going to edit this and put it on TikTok later. No, as I mentioned, this is our first outing, and as time goes by, we hope to turn these into live performances with physical spaces, face to face, which is a wonderful thought in this early post-COVID landscape. And if any of you have any ideas, you want to get involved, you want to follow us, you just our new website, srialondon.org. Please do send us suggestions. This is the start of a very long journey, and we want as many of you to join in as possible. So, on to my last little bit. I often think that when we talk about the Western tradition and the different practices involved in the Rosicrucian arts. We often focus on either the Victorian revival, the years when the manifestos first appeared, or the Renaissance period. But I'd like to take us back a little further to a moment in time where knowledge began its journey from the east to the west, and specifically to Islamic Spain. Many people are unaware of the pivotal point Islamic Spain played in this journey. As early as the 10th century, scholars in Al-Andalus had begun to gather translated texts from all over Europe. And in the latter half of the 10th century, that began being transmitted to the rest of Europe. For example, the Emerald Tablet was first translated into Latin from Arabic by a monk called Hugo of Santanella working in Tarazona, or as I would say, Tarazona. He translated many texts on alchemy, astronomy, astrology, and geomancy, all from the Arabic Renaissance. The famous Toledo School of Translation employed a team of translators that include Mozarabic Toledans, Jewish scholars, madrasa teachers, Christian monks, translating works from Arabic, Jewish, and Greek into Latin. It is because of Al-Andalus that we have works by Aristotle, Ptolemy, Euclid, Plotinus, and Plato. Islamic Spain gave us some of the greatest Kabbalists of history, Isaac Luria, Baal Shem Tov, and Moses de Leon. And we must remember that the Islam of this period was mostly one of tolerance, and all peoples of the book were allowed to live and worship alongside their Islamic masters in relative peace. I mean, I say relative because we all know that utopia doesn't quite exist where religion is involved. Now, some people know this historical line, but what is not so well known is the work of the Arabic scholars themselves, and especially the Sufi mystics of this period. So my personal interest in this Iberian syncretic approach stems from my own background. I'm an English, Russian, Coptic Egyptian Jew with a Persian Muslim uncle, and I lived in Andalusia for quite a while. And it's my personal belief that if the Reconquista didn't happen, the world we live in today would be one of greater tolerance and understanding. So to close what has been an absolutely wonderful afternoon, I have chosen a piece of Sufi poetry written by the great Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, one of the greatest Iberian Islamic mystics. He is often referred to as Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest sheikh. No other mystic poet except perhaps Rumi has surpassed Ibn Arabi in his influence and output. The piece is called O Doves That Haunt. So, ladies and gents, fellow seekers, I shall conclude this afternoon with a piece called O Doves That Haunt. Now, very quickly, as we all understand with Western symbolism, there's a few aspects of Islamic symbolism that I will just let you know so you can understand the piece. Doves, which we know as dove of peace, is known as a symbol for the influence of holiness and purity. There is a line called "In the thicket of the Gada trees," which means the fire of love. There is a word called Naman, which means the place of divine and holy bliss. And my pillars are the pillars of the four elements of earth, air, water, and fire. And one more, which I think is rather beautiful, a veiled gazelle, a beautiful way of describing the spiritual and mystical feelings of the illumination that a mystic may feel but cannot explain and can only use as an allegorical symbol. O doves that haunt. O doves that haunt the arak and ban trees, have pity. Do not double my woes by your lamentation. Have pity. Do not reveal by wailing and weeping my hidden desire and my secret sorrows. I respond to her at eve and morn with the plaintive cry of a longing man and the moan of an impassioned lover. The spirits faced one another in the thicket of Gada trees and bent their branches towards me, and it annihilated me. And they brought me sorts of tormenting desire and passion and untried affliction. Who will give me the promise of Jam? Who will give me Nahman? They encompass my heart moment after moment for the sake of love and anguish, and kiss my pillars, even as the best of mankind encompass the Kaaba, which the evidence of reason proclaims to be imperfect, and kiss the stones therein, although he was a prophet. What is the rank of temple in comparison with the dignity of man? How often they did vow and swear that they would not change, but one dyed with henna does not keep their oath. And one of the most wonderful things is a veiled gazelle who points with red fingertip and wink with eyelids. A gazelle whose pasture is between the best breastbone and the bow. O marvel, a garden amidst fires. My heart has become capable of every form. A pasture for gazelles, a convent for Christian monks, and a temple for idols, and the pilgrim's Kaaba, and the tables of the Torah, and the books of the Quran. I follow the religion of love. Whatever way love's camels take, that is my religion and my faith. Whatever way love's camels take, that is my religion and my faith. Thank you. Love, I think the perfect way to close what has been a truly wonderful afternoon. Let us part in love, live in love, and continue to learn in love. Have a wonderful day. We hope to see you soon.